Chapter 7, Emotional Messages. We'll talk about the principles of emotion, what drives emotions, how we send messages by our emotions, and talk about some obstacles to communicating emotions. Emotional communication is at the heart of emotional intelligence or social intelligence. Reading others and sending your own appropriate emotional messages. We'll talk at length about emotional intelligence in class because it's been determined to have a lot to do with success and happiness in life. Emotions are part of living, aren't they? We're human beings. They're part of every relationship we have. But our thinking can become confused when we're feeling some emotions. The first principle they talk about in the chapter is that emotional arousal is a multi-stage process. You see the little guy sweating here. We have physiological reactions when we feel emotions. And for instance, we become frightened. There's different schools of thought on which comes first. If we start sweating, breaking out in a sweat before we actually realize that we're frightened, or if we first mentally realize that we're frightened and then break out in a sweat. But basically, an event occurs and we feel frightened and we have physiological reactions to that emotion. So it's a multi-step process. The bodily reactions, the mental evaluation and interpretation of the emotion we're feeling, and it's also driven by cultural rules as to how we're supposed to act or if we should be frightened or not be frightened. Second principle regarding emotional messages is that emotions can be blended. We might not be able to put our finger on one specific emotion in some situations. For example, and we might feel more than one emotion in a situation. Anyone ever gotten a new job that they've never done before? You really wanted the job and you're really excited and happy when you get the job. But might there also be another emotion you're feeling? Might be a little apprehensive. You're not sure how you're going to do in the job. You've never done it before. So there are many situations where you can really recognize that you're feeling more than one distinct emotion. The third principle really refers back to the first principle. Emotions involve both the mind and the body, and it is that multi-step process. So both of them have a role in feeling an emotion and experiencing any emotion. Another principle is that emotions are influenced by many factors. They're certainly influenced by culture, as we're seeing everything to do with communication seems to be influenced by culture in some way or another. What our culture deems as being acceptable to show emotions. It's affected by our gender, our specific personality, the relationships between the people involved. So think about this question. Does context play a role here? Physical context, social psychological context, cultural context, temporal? Principle 5 is that emotions can be either adaptive or maladaptive. If you use an emotion adaptively, it can help you adjust to a situation. On the other hand, if an emotion is being used maladaptively, then it's getting in your way of accomplishing goals. So let's look at how the same emotion can be used both adaptively and maladaptively. Say, for example, you are really getting nervous about a speech that you need to do in a class. So you're frightened, you're apprehensive, you're a little frightened, a little apprehensive, a little nervous. If you use that feeling adaptively, you'll practice the speech. You'll be sure you know the topic well. And it will actually help you. By being a little fearful and apprehensive, you know you have to take some extra steps, and you'll really do a great job. On the other hand, if you're fearful and you're apprehensive, you're nervous, and you're using all those emotions maladaptively, well, you'd probably cut class, quit the class. So using it that way would get in the way of accomplishing your goals. Emotional expression also uses multiple channels. So if you think back to all those nonverbal channels that we talked about in Chapter 6, many of those can be used to express emotion. How much space we give a person, how far away from them we stay. We might be angry at someone and really not want to approach them. That might send a message. Or we might not want to smile. That sends a message. So there are multiple channels through which we can express emotion, along with verbal, of course. Another principle that we have to realize is that emotional expression is governed by display rules. And these are cultural. Display rules are just what they sound like. The rules, so to speak, that our culture has expressed to us as to what is allowable and what is not. What emotions we may display, in what situations, what contexts. Emotions can be used strategically, manipulation, although it's not generally an effective long-term tactic in a relationship. But we have to recognize that they can be used strategically. When you think about it, emotions are contagious. Many times, feelings expressed by one person are mimicked by others in a group situation. A really good example of this is laughter. You hear someone laugh, a lot of times it'll spur you to laugh too. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm with a group of people who are really feeling down and blue, I tend to kind of uh, take on that feeling a bit myself. Emotions have consequences. If you're angry, that can have long-term effects. And there are obstacles to emotional communication driven by culture. We learn the cultural norm for our gender. We might have fear of showing an emotion. We might be ridiculed, that type of thing, fear of ridicule. Sometimes it's just lack of interpersonal skills and you're just not comfortable. You don't know how to show emotion. And I think of times when I've been at a funeral and I'm not sure, how to best express myself. So in dealing with emotions, we have to recognize the obstacles and think about the contexts that are present and the advantages or disadvantage of expressing emotions. And this is all part of emotional intelligence. Considering the situation, who you're with, what the emotions are, your options for the expression, and how you're going to say it or show it, how you're going to express it. Handling anger. Ah, this is an emotion that can really get us in trouble. Anger is your reaction to events. Anger isn't necessarily bad, but it can be bad and it can be destructive. You can use anger adaptively or maladaptively. Think about a situation in which you could use anger adaptively. Research does show that displaying an emotion, whether it's anger or happiness, for example, actually made the emotion grow. Do you agree with this or not? Some things to ask yourself before you express anger. How important is this to me really? Is it worth getting angry about and showing my anger? Is my anger based on fact or just an inference that I'm making that's just a guess as to how it really is? May not be a fact. I may be using my imagination. Is this the right time and place? Am I with the right people or the right person? Can this person do anything about what I'm angry about? What do I want to achieve here? What are the long-term effects of showing anger the way that I'm thinking about showing it? What's the best way to express this anger? As far as responding to emotions in other people, empathy comes back to us here. Using depth listening, active listening techniques, expressing your empathy. These are some tips in responding to others who are showing emotions.